Hi, welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine. This is the podcast where we talk about complicated things and learn to improve over time, just like wine does. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice I don't have wine with me. I have a cup of tea. Based on this week's scheduling, it's early in the morning, so not having wine right now. But I think what I'll do is at the end of the episode, I'll insert another clip of me trying and talking about this week's wine. So if you're interested in that, wait till the end. But this week I have another super talented female director, writer, producer. Amazing. I don't think, because I think maybe had one class of undergrad together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I never really got a chance to get to know you that well, but as a freshman coming in, I always heard amazing things about you, and you were one of the people from the department that I looked up to the most.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. But for those people listening in, this week we have Michelle Noland, and I have a bio that I can read for her, so this is Michelle. She's a graduate from La Sierra University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Film and Television Production. Although her professional work is oriented towards meaningful filmmaking, she has always made community service a priority in her life. For over a decade, Michelle has been a volunteer leader for youth, young adult, and family programs held in her local community that promotes relational healing and personal growth. She currently lives with her husband, Jesus, who fully supports her creative endeavors. They currently co-host a podcast entitled The Messy Creative, which I'll link in all the descriptions so you can check it out later, and which gives them a platform to discuss the power of meaningful storytelling. Her most recent project, The Unbridged Woman, was held in March of this year for women looking for healing and wholeness. So, based on that, you can kind of tell why I asked Michelle to come on. I watched your webinar and I thought it was really insightful and super helpful. And listening to your guests like Dr. Quintana and everybody, it was really great insight for me as well to be able to kind of understand how women process things and the healing and just the whole journey. So can you tell me more about how you got into that and how that's personal to you? And
Yeah, growing up, I've always had a hard time understanding what my worth was as just a human being in general. Um, I I always looked to other people to sort of validate me and what I was doing, and am I pretty enough? Am I smart enough? All this stuff. And it's just kind of been a running theme in my life. And I don't think I really acknowledged that until I was a teenager. And later on, I was around at 18, 19, I think. And I was just really coming to an understanding of how ridiculous it was that I was seeing myself in such a negative light. And so I wanted to do what I could to help other women to better understand themselves, like what you were saying, just understanding how our brains process things and how we see ourselves. And so I took advantage of that. I started to put together small events within my community. And the first event that I did by myself was called Far Above Jewels. And that was when I think I was 19 or 20 years old. And so it kind of had the same themes as the Unabridged Woman, but because it wasn't COVID time, everyone actually got together and were having talks and stuff. So it was really cool. It was small groups, breakout sessions. It had 3 amazing speakers. It was an entire weekend long. So I kind of made this little tiny retreat in my community. So that was really awesome.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was really fun. And it wasn't based out of oh, I have everything figured out, let me teach you kind of a thing. It was just me acknowledging this is something that I'm still learning. I want to learn more about it. And I know that a lot of other women want to learn more about it too. So I wanted to put it together kind of for me to learn in a way. So that's kind of how it started. And then it grew into more family oriented stuff after I got married. Because I was just starting to realize how important it was for the family unit to just be on the same page with each other emotionally and understanding the importance of relationships and how we communicate with each other. And so my husband and I were starting to do those events together for families, and it was it was again like a weekend long thing, and everyone was coming together to learn about like how to talk to each other, how to have conflict resolution, and just like basic stuff that I think we should be taught in school, but we're never
Mhm.
taught this kind of stuff. So yeah, it just kind of evolved, and I kept trying to find new ways to just make events, and my husband was a really big help in that. And so I thought like I wanted to do something in quarantine because I was going through like loneliness and just trying to figure out something that I can do for other people because I felt like I was really helpless during quarantine, and 2020 was just crazy. And so I thought, well, since everyone's on Zoom now, everyone's like doing online stuff, like they should all have access to like at least some type of video call. So I was like, well, why don't I just do an online event and make it free for everyone to join, but have like a really um, knowledgeable woman leading it out, someone that knows how to deal with all these things that women are going through, especially during quarantine.
Right.
And so I actually asked Vanessa Quintana. She was the speaker for our family event actually a couple years ago, and she just blew me away with everything that she was talking about. I was like, whoa, I did not see it that way before. And so I was like, you have to come back for this event. Like, we really need you. This is something that a lot of women are going to get a lot of value out of, just everything that you've learned through your education. And yeah, so it's kind of the origins of how the event started, and hopefully I can do more events in the future. I'm trying to see if I can make it maybe like a quarterly thing, or just something that
Oh,
women can keep coming back to and getting different information from. So
I think that's a brilliant idea. I even know for myself, like something like that's so needed. And it's
mhm.
kind of similar to why I'm starting this podcast because I realize there's just so many conversations that aren't happening
Yeah.
that are either like taboo or just people aren't aware of. And so I'm really glad to have all the other guests and you to like bring up new topics and awareness and insight for people and resources. So I love the idea of the quarterly. Like I know for me, I'd benefit from that.
Yeah. I would too.
So, would you be comfortable sharing when we last talked a little bit, you talked about like how your family history and those experiences kind of are now translating to how you relate with others and like growing from that. Would you be comfortable sharing about that?
Yeah, sure. So growing up, I realized that a lot of my decisions in life were based out of fear. I had parents who argued. I feel like everyone has parents who at least argued once,
Mm-hmm.
but the way that they argued with each other, it was not healthy. It was dysfunctional. Um, there were a lot of great things about my childhood. I'm not trying to make like a sob story or anything like that, but just like seeing the dynamic between my parents and the way that they related to each other, it was not the best example of like how to have conflict resolution, how to voice your opinion. There was a lot of like sweeping your emotions under the rug until everything just blew up. And so I learned that sharing my emotions, the negative emotions that I had, was a bad thing. And I learned that just understanding that it's okay for someone else to be angry, that was really hard for me because I always viewed anger as something bad and something we should all stay away from. And it was something I was terrified of because whenever people in my house would get angry, it was usually because the emotions were swept under the rug. No one addressed anything. And then it just turned into this huge mess where everyone was just yelling and fighting. And so it really shaped the way that I saw negative emotions, and I I learned to suppress that within myself. And it wasn't until I was like 15 years old that my suppression of my negative emotions actually became physical. And I think that's when I understood like there's a mind body connection to a lot of things. that we go through. And if we're not expressing anger or frustration or sadness on a regular basis in a healthy way, that it does affect you physically. It actually makes you sick. And so I was getting lightheaded. I was getting headaches every day. I started like shaking all the time. Like my
Mm-hmm.
body was literally trembling, and I was like cold all the time. It was just like really weird, and I didn't understand why I was feeling that way. I ended up going to it would have been urgent care, but since it was so late at night, it ended up being the ER because the urgent care was closed. So my mom and my dad and my brother took me to urgent care, and they were like examining me, and they're like, there's nothing wrong. Like we took like EKG and all this stuff, like just to see what was wrong with me. And there was nothing wrong physically, but I was expressing these physical symptoms of like something is wrong and I don't know what it is. And so they were asking like, well, are you stressed out at home? And I was like, yeah. Do you have a lot of stress? Like, do you have like anxiety? I was like, yeah, I guess I do. And I didn't really know at the time. I guess like I was feeling stress, but I never labeled it as stress. I just felt like this is kind of just the state my family is in right now. And um I I didn't express myself emotionally that much. Like I would express joy and happiness, all the good stuff. Like I would find things to laugh at. I think comedy was like a really big outlet for me because I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of able to joke about things that I felt were kind of taboo or whatever, like just kind of like an outlet for me. But it really like opened my eyes to the importance of expressing myself. And even to this day, like that was what, 15 years ago. um, i I still have trouble expressing myself. I believe I'm doing a better job at being more honest, but that's always a goal for me, that I need to be honest with my feelings, especially in my relationship with my husband. I need to just like I need to understand that it's a safe space to express myself, and that the relationships that were formed in my family and the atmosphere that was formed in my family is not the same as my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a really big struggle for me because I always go back, like it's like a habit, like I go back to that just bottling up my emotions, not expressing myself. And it it was just really crazy how it just came out physically. Like if you don't relieve stress verbally, it's going to come out somehow, and it turned out to be like physical symptoms. So it was just really, it was really crazy just seeing myself like falling apart physically. And I was like, okay, I got to do something. And so I got involved in church. I got involved in like community stuff and just understanding that I need to be able to express myself somehow with other people. I can't do this alone. I can't stay isolated. I need to learn how to build healthier relationships. And yeah, that's kind of like a big part of my family history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
The whole time I'm nodding my head, I'm like, oof, because I relate to a lot of that. I grew up in with a household where my mom was very aggressive
Mhm,
and just dominated the whole room. You weren't allowed to speak up how you felt because it became a huge argument. So I
mhm.
grew up, I learned that like love is conditional and I can't
Yeah.
say anything because I have to pick my battles or like not mention anything. And so like the repressed emotions and like it, I think I was 16 when I had my first anxiety attack. And that's when I realized when you repress your emotions so much, it has to come out in some way. And recently, I just read a book called When the Body Says No. I'll link in the description if whoever wants to read it. But it talks about how stress, repressed emotions, anger, it can come out as a disease or your body ends up getting sick.
Mhm,
And so, like what you're saying, it's so important to be able to voice and to share, to like release that stress in a healthy way. Because when you repress it, like you crack. And like, that would happen for me even now
mhm,
where I'm learning to, I need to voice if something's upsetting me or if I'm stressed to ask for help, because it is okay to ask for help. You don't have to do it alone. And so I'm the whole time just been nodding my head. I'm like, ooh, this is like reaffirming for me, because this is stuff I'm working on too.
Hmm.
With now, you're married. How long have you been married?
6.5 years.
Oh
It's
wow,
kind of
congrats.
crazy. Thank
So,
you.
for the rest of us that aren't married yet, and for those of us that have had trouble relating and having the communication, being able to form that trust and intimacy when it comes to your emotions and who you are, what were some of the things when you got married in the beginning that were the biggest shock to you, or things you had to learn to grow with Jesus? And now that you've been married for 6.5 years, what are things now that you are still learning or have grown to adjust with him?
Hmm. So it was sort of a culture shock in a way. Um, and I don't think it, I mean, it does play a part in it. Jesus is half Hispanic, half Black. And so my family is Hispanic and white. And so there is a difference there in some ways, but um, just the differences between our families were, and I think that's why we were attracted to each other in the first place, um, is because we were kind of like the opposites attract kind of a
Mm-hmm.
situation. Um, his family was very vocal. Like whenever something would be wrong or someone would be upset about something, they totally expressed themselves and they just like hashed it out and then they got over it and then everyone was fine and everyone was cool. And that it was something that I was really attracted to because like I wanted that because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have the ability to just say how I felt or to say like, oh, this really like pissed me off or like just like stuff like it's just there's so much freedom in that, like just being able to say something like that. And so I was really attracted to that he was able to just say how he felt all the time. He's very in touch with his emotions, which I'm very thankful for. Um, and I it's kind of funny because like there's like the stereotypes of men and women, and usually the stereotype is that the woman is very in touch with her emotions and the man is very closed off and bottles things up, but it's totally the opposite with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really learning from him how to be in touch with my emotions and that it's okay to be honest with how you're feeling and it's important to speak up. And so like our family cultures are so different that it was a little bit of a shock at first, and I was really trying to get used to it and to grow in that way. And it took a while for me to um, get closer to a point. I'm not at that point yet, but I'm trying to work towards getting closer to being able to just be 100% honest all the time about how I'm feeling because I've just been so conditioned to kind of lie about how I'm feeling about things and just to say everything's okay when it's not. And um, so that's been really interesting. And just another thing we've been learning too is how to love each other in a way that the other person feels loved. And that's something I've been struggling with because I think a lot of the time growing up, I never felt fully like I was getting my emotional needs met. Um, and so when I got in this relationship, I was very selfish a lot of the time. And I would get emotional, upset about things. Like when things didn't go my way, I was feeling very rejected. And I think it was just because of the lack of fulfillment from my family life growing up that I was feeling this way. And I had to keep training my brain to like tell myself like this is different, this is a different kind of relationship, you don't have to go back to that old way of doing things. And so I think the biggest thing that I'm learning right now is just to um, see my relationship with my husband as a different environment, a safe environment, something that I can express myself in, and to just fully love my husband the way that I need to and the way that he needs. Because if I'm trying to love him the way that I want to be loved, it's not gonna work.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are two different people, and it was like kind of starting. I was reading like the five love languages and
I was about to ask you about that.
yeah. So yeah, I was reading that book, just like understanding more, but it's so surface level. Like the book is important because it opens your eyes to like, oh wait, maybe they don't perceive what I'm doing as love, and I'm seeing it as love, and they're like, why aren't you doing this and that? It's like, oh, I thought I was doing the right thing. But it's so important to just keep learning about your spouse, and fully understanding who they are and how they want to be loved. And it takes so much selflessness. And there are days when I am not selfless, and I struggle sometimes. And I I guess I just feel like the whole conclusion of this whole conversation is that I'm still learning,
Mm-hmm.
and I am still struggling, but I'm struggling towards making it to a point where I can just fully be selfless and to love my husband the way that I need to. Um, did that answer your question?
Oh no, yeah, that brings a lot of insight because right now I'm like I'm learning that my love language has shifted
Hmm.
because my boyfriend says his physical touch, and
Yeah.
that's not on my top. What me at first I thought it was quality time, and now I've realized it's more of words of affirmation. Like
Mm.
I've learned that I need the trust when we're communicating so I can feel open and vulnerable to be affectionate. And for him, he just wants to be affectionate. And so I've learned like, oh, this is how you want to love me. I'm not that way. So we're both not meeting each other. So it's
Yeah.
like learning how to first like communicate, say what your needs are, because if you don't, how can the other person know? And then kind of working on making the compromises and putting that practice in. Are you familiar with the attachment styles?
Yes, I am. I was actually reading a book called How We Love. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
No, not yet.
That one goes into detail about each love attachment style, but I am definitely the people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
That is my style. Just putting everything like aside for other people, and like trying to um, make myself, um, I guess, just accessible for other people, but then like totally feeling resentful afterwards, like you don't care about me.
Yeah, so once I started going to therapy this year, and like before starting this episode podcast, I've been just reading on a bunch of books to kind of one, because I realized there's a lot of stuff I still need to work on. And I'm like, okay, shoot, but oh well. And so all these books I've read are talking about attachment styles and how your relationship with your parents or the relationship they have with each other affects that. So I wanted to bring that up with you since we've talked about with parents and how that kind of creates our perspective of how relationships are and how they work. For me, my attachment style is the dismissive avoidance. So I rather be really independent with myself and kind of not get close because it's more of like my safety net and I'm kind of in control of how my emotions are. And I think I'm processing now, like you said, when you're in a relationship currently that's not related to the past, it's a whole new circumstance, it's a safe space, and not bringing those feelings or hurt into the new relationship. What are some things you've learned with like your attachment style and maybe with Jesus's and how that works together?
Mm. So there is a lot of retreating and chasing going on, um, because I have a tendency to bottle up feelings and um, not express myself. It causes him to have to like reach out and try to get those emotions out of me, instead of me just volunteering that information with him, or just being open with him. And I think in that way, it's because of my people pleaser attachment style that I'm always trying to avoid conflict, and I'm trying to not rock the boat or anything, because whenever that would happen in my house growing up, it would just cause big arguments, and that's what I was scared of. I was scared of the big argument. But just understanding that it's okay to have arguments, and that it's not an unhealthy thing. I mean, you can take it to an unhealthy level when you're arguing, but like, disagreeing is okay. And that's been a really hard thing for me to just live with, I guess, is like understanding that someone's not seeing your viewpoint, or the way that they grew up is just different for them. Like, their truth is different from your truth, and you're trying to like come together and bring these two family dynamics together and create a new dynamic. That's really been challenging, but it's something that needs to happen in order for the relationship to be healthy.
That's very, very insightful. One of the other topics we kind of discussed is how your faith helps with your anxiety. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I believe that there is a God, um, and it helps me to really cope and fill in the gaps, I guess, because I know that I have weak points, and I have areas in my life where I am still learning and growing. And I think just understanding that there is someone out there that that knows like how to um soothe me in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, that
like
makes sense.
knows all your needs, knows everything that you really want out of life, and is there for you. That's such a wonderful safety blanket emotionally, like, as we're like changing and growing together, especially in my marriage. It's been really helpful to have sort of like this third party there. um, and it's kind of the same with therapy too, like just having a counselor there that is the third party, something that you both can come to, and that they can give advice back. I've noticed that just understanding my spirituality in that way, of like, this is also a third party that I can go to with my husband and without my husband, and can get wisdom from, and understand like that um, it's okay to be weak sometimes, and that it's the only thing that really matters is that you're just continually pushing forward and growing, and understanding that like, God has your back no matter what. That's just been super helpful in just finding peace within myself, and understanding that I'm not alone, even though I might feel alone sometimes. I'm not alone, and that, yeah, I guess just having someone always there for you, someone that you can talk to, and knowing that talking to them does make a difference emotionally. And it does really feel like a personal therapist, like better
Mhm.
help, but like up in the sky kind of a thing.
I understand that for me because I have my faith too. And so I notice, depending for whatever that may look like for people, if it's God, if it's being spiritual, or if it's yourself, like, regardless, there's always a thing. If you have something like a higher power or something else to kind of put your faith in, or energy, like you put that relationship in, you end up receiving it back. And when I started having anxiety attacks and everything, I've realized that going to church or praying or doing other things that help me spiritually, I've noticed how much it tremendously helps me.
Mhm.
For the time, do you ever have times when you notice that your faith, or you're kind of struggling with the man upstairs, or there's times where you're having a hard time to kind of pray or put the work in? How does that look like for you, and what do you do to kind of help get you in a more center track?
I think for me, I I've realized that I've just like with my husband and other relationships, that I sometimes project negative feelings onto God, and I was under like I was realizing that I was doing that probably like a year ago. Um, that there were some situations I was going through and it was really hard for me, and I felt like um, it was like kind of like God doing it to me, or like I don't know. I felt like it wasn't my fault in a way, but then I was realizing that I was putting this negative feeling onto God, and it wasn't correct. It was like me just projecting blame onto somebody because I didn't want to take responsibility for it. And so when I realized that, I had to sort of like change my mindset and understand that um, God is not my enemy. God is not um, out to get me somehow, or and not that it's not okay to be mad at God sometimes, because it is a relationship in that way. But just understanding that I was doing that was really opening my eyes to, like, I was distancing myself, because when you're in relationships with people, it's like sometimes when you get hurt by something, you start distancing yourself from
Mm.
people or situations. And I realized that I was purposefully doing that with God, and I wanted to um, get back to the way that I felt when I first started believing in God, because I felt like I was on cloud nine and everything was great, and
Mm-hmm.
I just felt complete. And so I've just really been thinking back to that time, like what was I doing then to feel that way, and why was I feeling that way? And I think it was just a lot of it was like the things that I consume, like even like podcasts and films and music and all that stuff, like it all plays a role in where you're at mentally. And if I'm listening to things or watching things that are tearing me down emotionally, then that isn't going to help me feel closer to God. Like I need to consume more things that remind me of how good God has been to me, and why it's important that I even care about God and why I
Mm-hmm.
love God and stuff. So it's just it's been interesting, just understanding that, and understanding that I am in a bad way treating God like I have treated other relationships, and like distancing myself.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You mentioned earlier about, I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you kind of go back to retreating because that's what you're used to. And I think for most people, it's like a comfortable state, it's familiar. And so there's other ways to kind of approach people or handle things healthier, but we don't because we're used to what we know and it's familiar versus going to something that's unsure. What have been some of the bigger things you've like overcome when it comes to like relating with people, your husband or family? What are some things that have been maybe the most scary or the most intimidating?
Hmm. Definitely um, being honest about negative feelings has been one of the hardest things. It's it's something that I need to keep practicing, because I do have a tendency to fall back into my old habits of like just not sharing and bottling up. And so I think for me it's just kind of been a struggle of like just practicing that, and sharing sharing vulnerable parts of me that I think I might get rejected for,
Mm.
and understanding that if they really love me, they're still going to be there afterwards. Like it's not like I'm going to be abandoned forever if I share this information with them. And it takes a lot of trust, I think, in the other person, and trust in yourself too, that like even if that person does walk away, like you're going to be okay. If they really love you, they're going to stick around, and you just need to trust yourself and the other person and just share it, like just push yourself past that fear and just share the information and just see what happens.
That part, the trusting yourself, I've actually just been wrapping my brain around this week. I'm reading another book called Daring to Trust. I'll put also the link for that in the description, but that part I've been kind of realizing like, oh, you really do need to trust yourself because in that sense, you come first and you need to have the trust and security within yourself before you can put it to anybody else.
Yeah.
And for me, that's been something I was not expecting to ever learn. But like, I didn't know that would be a thing.
Yeah.
At least it's like, oh, I always thought you trusted other people, but not yourself. But I'm glad you brought it up because for me, I've just been trying to like, okay, how do you trust yourself? Like, what are things that you do?
hmm
For you, what are some things that you kind of tell yourself or work on to kind of build that trust in yourself?
I think just understanding that I can handle it is
Mm-hmm.
a big part because sometimes I see myself as weak, and I that adds a lot to my fear of like if I'll actually be able to handle situations that come up. And so I just decide to ignore everything and like, well, that's not going to help because I'm not progressing in any way. I'm just like trying to shield myself from pain. But I think, yeah, just like working through the pain of a situation and understanding that I'm going to survive at the end. It's not something that's going to completely destroy me. That's something that I need to keep telling myself. Um, and just believing that I am smart enough and I am emotionally intelligent enough to understand how to solve the issue. Because I have a tendency, yeah, it's just like a tendency to like think that I'm not going to be good enough or I won't understand how to do something. And then I just end up not doing the thing, which is bad.
Mm-hmm. That's really true. To kind of bring it back full circle to your webinar, what are some things that for people that want to watch it, they can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would want them to keep in mind as they're going to learn from the people that spoke on the webinar?
hmm Um, a really important thing I think is whenever you're going to therapy or you're going to counseling or you're reading a self-help book or whatever, it's really important that you constantly think of how the information applies to you because there are people in my life who whenever they're like watching something or reading something they're always looking at other people like oh this sounds like so and so or like I know somebody that does this all the time but it's like no, how does it apply to you yourself? And just having that introspection and seeing yourself for who you truly are, like your weaknesses and your flaws and everything, I think that's a great first step to overcoming a lot of issues because when you sort of blind yourself to the things that you're doing wrong, it's super hard to come to a point where you realize you need to change. So when you watch it, I would just suggest that you just fully think about your own life, like really just take time to think about yourself and how you react to things and witness how your reactions are in conversations with people and in the way that you just live your life, and it'll help you to better understand where you can start to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was listening to it, and Vanessa Quintana had her slideshow or presentation, kind of talking about like the process of how women process things and go through understanding and all that. For me, I thought that was really interesting because I've never been able to see it on a presentation of like, this is how it works for most of us, and this is what we can do. So, for any women out there, even men too, I think it's really good insight just to be able to learn more, and it's a good resource. And I'm definitely excited to see the more webinars and quarterly retreats or whenever COVID starts releasing and like
hmm
being less, what's the word, prominent.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what else you create.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anything you want to plug in? Do you want to share a little bit about your podcast for those that are curious?
Yeah, sure. So just for the unabridged woman, I have an Instagram and Twitter page specifically for that. So if you go to at the unabridged woman, on Instagram or Unabridged Woman on Twitter. Um, you can just find more resources and links to the Unabridged Woman video. And whenever future events come, it'll all be on that page. And then also for my podcast, it kind of has a little bit to do with emotional intelligence in a way, but it's talking mostly about storytelling. And I host it with my husband. It's called The Musty Creative, and we interview people and they share their experiences as creators and what they have learned in the process of creating and what they can share with our audience and how it can benefit them in whatever they're creating. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, I'll have all the links, the Instagram pages, everything in the description, whatever platform you're listening at. Is there any last comments or messages you want to say?
Just thank you for having me on the show. It's been a really amazing time just talking with you, and I don't think I've ever shared all this information publicly, so
Well, thank you for trusting the space and doing this with me.
mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was finally to actually kind of have a first time talk to you
Mm-hmm.
after all of undergrad, like seeing you as the more upperclassman and being like, oh, she's so good. She has really great films. I've never had a chance to talk to her.
And now we get to do it in public. So.
I know. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Michelle. I appreciated this time. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Again, everything will be in the description, and we will see you guys next week. Hey, guys. So, like I said in the beginning of the episode, I'm recording this after, and here we have a Chenin Blanc 2020 from Miriam Alexandra Reserve Prince Vineyard. So I have in my tumbler. I'm gonna read the wine's bio, her bio, and I'll taste it. And yeah. Okay, this crisp reserve white wine is exactly why Alexandria is your reigning champion of Chenin Blanc. Any Chenin Blanc she touches comes away with mesmerizing freshness and luscious layers of bright fruit and summery citrus. Alexandria chooses top-grade Chenin from the Prince Vineyard in Clarksburg, where deep, mineral-rich soils help the vines prosper, giving her grapes loaded with concentrated, irresistible flavors. I'm going to taste it now. That's actually really good. Okay, one thing I'm noticing with this podcast is I thought I was strictly just a red wine type of person, but I'm getting more pulled into white wines. This I highly recommend. I know in most of the episodes I don't really talk much about the wines because I always go way too excited to talk about with the guest, but since this is afterwards, you're hearing a little bit more. Okay, her bio. She graduated from UC Davis with a degree in viticulture and enology, and she has been working in winemaking ever since, and she has gotten to do harvests in Napa and Chile. Flipping between the northern and southern hemispheres to do more than one harvest a year. She says, I became a winemaker because it blends art and science, and I love doing something that has a finished project that my friends and family can enjoy. That's awesome. She has been working with world-class winemakers for the last 5 years, and this is her first time making her own wine. So, yeah, again, here's the bottle. Again, the links to the wine I always post in the bios, whatever platform you're listening on. So if you're a white type of wine person, I really recommend this one. Sorry, this is getting more attention than the other wines I talk about. Again, I always get way too excited to start conversations with the other episodes. So I might start doing wine tasting at the end. Anyway, cheers, guys. If you listen with wine or whatever thing, get water. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, rate, follow whatever platform you're on. Share with your friends, and thanks so much.